Hey guys, welcome back. So over the past year or so, we've spent an absolutely disgusting amount of time talking about the return of the Flood, but we haven't really paid that much attention to the sort of knock-on effect that it's going to have on certain characters, and in my opinion, the most interesting of which is going to be the Didact. But why is the Didact so important? Well, he's got a very long history with the Flood, and by long, I mean longer than the list of excuses that EA made up to defend Battlefront 2. That long. He was the head of the Foreigner military during the Foreigner Flood War. He was stranded for what was supposedly years in Flood-controlled territory with only a few other foreigners, and was also captured and interrogated by the Primordial, which is where he got the Logic Plague, and then he had to watch the downfall of his entire species at the hand of the Flood after trying so many desperate measures to save them. Measures so desperate, his wife ended up betraying him and locking him away in a cryptum. And that's just the too long don't read. Like the Prometheans, the Didact has more ties to the Flood than anything else in Halo. To phrase it in a cringy way, you could kind of say the Flood are his arch nemesis, and his current whereabouts could make his role when they eventually return even more important. So the Didact is currently in the domain. He was composed by Chief and Blue Team on Installation 03, and then his composed essence somehow made it into the domain, the same place as Cortana. So I think the significance of this is pretty obvious. If Cortana does have the Logic Plague, which, I mean, come on, at this point they may as well just have confirmed it, then the Didact is locked inside the same entity as the puppet of the Flood, the Hand of the Gravemind, if you will. You know what, actually that's a pretty damn good name for her. If he's present in Halo 6 or 7, this could lead to some really cool back and forths between the two within the domain, and considering both A, the fact that the Foreigners made heavy use of the domain to store information about pretty much everything relating to them as a species, and B, the fact that the domain is a precursor and therefore Flood construct, it has major significance to the both of them, and that's not even considering Cortana infecting the domain itself with the Logic Plague to sort of mass distribute it to all the other AIs in it. Now, by the way, that's not a fact, that isn't something that we even know can happen, it's just a sort of cool idea that I've had for a while, considering that all the created AIs are using the domain to give them this infinite life, so if that were to happen, they'd all transition from just following Cortana's orders to actually being puppets of the Flood. But like I said, we don't even know if this is possible. This is just some cool hypothetical stuff that I've come up with. But this doesn't exactly cover why or how he's going to become friendly to us, humanity. It might seem weird considering he clearly hated humanity in Halo 4 and also during the Foreigner Flood War, but when you weigh up what humanity cost him compared to what the Flood cost him, the Flood arguably come out on top. I mean, yeah, he did lose his children to humanity, but he lost his entire species to the Flood, so I guess it's subjective, but either way, the Didact dedicated the entire latter part of the Foreigner's time as a powerful entity in the universe to stopping the Flood. He commissioned the creation of the Shield Worlds to act as almost radars to monitor for Flood activity after the Foreigner-Human War, as well as to act as safe havens if they were to return, and also forward operating bases for the Foreigner military to fight against them. He campaigned against the creation of the Halos because of how destructive they were, but as we know, he lost, the Halos were ultimately created, and the Flood led to them being fired, which wiped out his entire species that he'd fought for so long to defend. So with all this in mind, I think it's safe to say that he has quite a few gears to grind with the Flood. Gears so big to grind that maybe he could set aside his differences with humanity for the meantime to focus on the Flood, considering that the threat they pose will likely be around the same size as when the Foreigners were wiped out, and even in his madness, I really doubt that he'd want the Flood to see another victory on that scale again, so much so that it might cause him to side with humanity. However, there is still one last reason. So the primary reason for his hatred towards humanity in Halo 4 was due to the Logic Plague that was instilled in him by the Primordial, and it's also why he composed his fellow warriors and turned them into Promethean Knights. At the end of the Foreigner Flood War, the Librarian locked him in a cryptum where he was supposed to communicate with the domain for God knows how long, which would supposedly cure him of this madness. However, because the domain is a precursor artifact and thus a living being, the firing of the Halo array heavily damaged it and essentially turned it offline. And that's why he's still equally crazy in Halo 4. He basically just spent 100,000 years in this big ball, festering in his own anger and rage, instead of meditating his way back to sanity. However, since Halo 4's launch, this has been kind of disputed. So in Halo Fractures last year, we had a story detailing a bunch of the surviving Foreigners who basically went to go and restart the domain after the firing of the array. Which means that the Didact should have been cured in Halo 4 because the domain was restarted, and thus his cryptum should have been able to connect to it, and I don't really get how all of this adds up, because to me it seems like a sort of retcon, or at the very least it seems like two possible storylines are clashing in a way that doesn't make any sense, but anyways, I digress. Because the Didact isn't just connected to the domain now, he's actually in it. His madness maybe could have been cured, or at the very, very least, be in the process of being cured, so he might be a little more lenient towards humanity, at least than he was in Halo 4, especially when the Flood are knocking on the door. He could actually be a real asset to humanity too, considering that he's got a very, very long history of combat against the Flood, so he knows more than pretty much anything alive right now in the galaxy about the Flood, how to combat them, how they spread, and how to defeat them. And the fact that he's in the domain, so humanity almost have a man on the inside, if you will, could also be pretty significant too for stopping Cortana. How and if this will come to pass, only time will tell, but there'll be no better time for the Didact to make his grand reappearance than when the Flood come back, and given what we've covered today, the evidence is there. There is some evidence there for him at least temporarily returning as an ally. So that's all for today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. This is actually the first theory video that I've made in, like, months, so if you enjoyed this almost throwback style video, then don't forget to leave a like down below. I'm going to have more of this type of video coming as soon as we get some information about Halo 6 or whatever the next Halo game is, because right now it's pretty damn hard to make theories and lore videos when there's no fresh content, so I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try as hard as I can to, but as soon as we get some more news or content about whatever we're getting next, then these videos will be back in force. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.